My name is Riley Reed. 5 years ago, my father stood at the head of a Thanksgiving table laden with organic turkey and fine wine, and handed me a crumpled $3 scratch-off lottery ticket. He looked me in the eye and said, "I hope this covers the gas you wasted driving here, Riley. You need to start making your own luck." I spent the rest of that night in a cramped bathroom, shaking as I realized that a $3 scrap of paper was actually worth $150 million. I had no idea that while I was washing my face, my parents were already in the living room handing my brother Trevor the keys to a luxury European cruise and a partnership in the family firm. I had no idea that 5 years later, they'd be standing in my corporate headquarters, begging a mysterious billionaire for a loan to save them from homelessness, only to realize the person they were pleading with was the daughter they'd discarded for the price of a cup of coffee. Before I tell you exactly what happened when I slid a $3 bill across the mahogany desk and told them I was finally following their advice, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you believe that being family doesn't give someone the right to treat you like a budget line item. Drop a comment and let me know, what's the most insulting gift you've ever received? I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything. I remember the smell of the room, sage, rosemary, and the stifling scent of favoritism. It was November 24th. I had driven 6 hours in my beat-up sedan, my trunk packed with a homemade pie my mother would probably complain was too heavy. Mom's name was the first thing I heard when I walked in. "Trevor, darling, sit here. We have a surprise for you." I stood in the doorway, unnoticed for a full minute, watching my mother, Elaine, fuss over my brother's silk tie like he was a visiting dignitary instead of a 28-year-old who still lived in their pool house. My father, Marcus, was already pouring the expensive Cabernet. I smiled, trying to find my place at a table that always felt like it had one too few chairs. "Hey Mom. I brought the..." "Just put it in the kitchen, Riley," she interrupted without looking up. "We're about to do the announcements." My stomach did that familiar somersault. In the Reed house, announcements were usually a synonym for Trevor's latest participation trophy. I sat down, my hands folded in my lap as Marcus stood up and cleared his throat. "This has been a big year for the family firm," Marcus beamed, clapping Trevor on the shoulder. "And because Trevor has shown such potential, your mother and I wanted to show our appreciation." He slid a thick, gold-embossed envelope across the table. Trevor opened it and his eyes practically turned into dollar signs. "A Mediterranean cruise? First class? Dad, you're the best." I waited. I didn't expect a cruise, but maybe a good job on that promotion, or a genuine hug. Instead, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a single orange scratch-off ticket. He tossed it toward my bread plate. "And for you, Riley. I know things have been tight for you. Maybe this will be the spark you need to finally get ahead. After all, a Reed makes her own luck." I actually laughed. I thought it was a joke, the setup for a real gift. "What's this?" "It's a chance, Riley," Elaine said, her voice flat and cold. Your brother, needs to decompress. He's the future of the firm. You have your little job. This is just a bit of fun. Don't make it a drama." I gripped the edge of the table, the $3 ticket feeling like a lead weight in my hand. I didn't wait to see Trevor's reaction to his cruise tickets or hear the rest of Marcus's speech about the Reed legacy. I clutched that orange scrap of paper like it was a shard of glass and retreated to the hallway bathroom, locking the door with a click that felt like a final seal. The air in the small room was thick with the scent of expensive lavender soap and the muffled sound of my family's laughter echoing through the vents. It was the sound of a club I was never invited to join. I sat on the edge of the marble bathtub, my hands trembling so violently I had to press them against my knees. "Make your own luck, Riley." The words were meant to be a dismissal, a way for Marcus to justify his stinginess by reframing it as a lesson in character. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a quarter. With a clinical, desperate focus, I began to scrape away the silver coating. The first number was a 14. My eyes darted to the winning numbers at the top. There was 14. I felt a strange, cold pressure in my chest. I scratched the next. 22. A match. Then 31. Another match. I stopped, my breath hitching in a throat that had suddenly gone dry. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. I was the budget child. I was the one who bought the generic brand and drove the car with the check engine light permanently glowing. I finished the row. Every single number was a perfect, identical twin to the ones printed in the winning box. I looked down at the prize legend at the bottom of the card. Below the final matching number, the prize wasn't $5 or a free ticket. It was a string of zeros that didn't seem to end. $150 million. The world went silent. The laughter in the living room, Trevor's boasting, the clink of silverware. It all drifted away, becoming as distant as a dream I'd finally woken up from. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see the unlucky daughter anymore. I saw a woman who suddenly held the deed to her own life. I realized then that my father was right about one thing. I was going to make my own luck. And I was going to start by making sure he never saw a single cent of it. I tucked the ticket deep into the hidden pocket of my cardigan, the paper feeling hot against my skin like a live wire. I took a deep breath, splashed cold water on my face to hide the flush of adrenaline, and walked back into the dining room. The atmosphere was thick with the suffocating warmth of a family that had already decided I was the background noise to their main event. I sat down and the transition was jarring. On my left, Trevor was already scrolling through luxury excursions on his phone, debating whether the helicopter tour of the Amalfi Coast was too cliché. Across from me, Marcus was topping off his wine, his face glowing with the smug satisfaction of a man who had successfully secured his legacy. "So Riley," Elaine said, not looking up as she meticulously carved a piece of turkey. "Once you finish your little project at the office, you should really think about helping Trevor pack. You've always been so good at the organizational side of things. It would be a nice way to show your brother you're happy for his success." "Sure, Mom," I said, the words tasting like copper. I looked around the room, at the heavy mahogany table, the designer drapes, and the sprawling backyard I used to think was an empire. I realized then that I could buy this house. I could buy the 3 houses next to it. I could buy the firm my father was so proud of and turn it into a parking lot without denting my bank balance. "I think Trevor deserves it," Marcus added, leaning back. "It's about prestige, Riley. Something you'll understand when you've worked as hard as he has. We Reeds have a standard to uphold. It's a shame your luck hasn't turned yet, but that's why we give you those tickets. A little hope for the hopeless, right?" He let out a hearty laugh and Trevor joined in, a sharp, entitled sound. I just smiled and took a bite of the pie they hadn't bothered to thank me for. It was the best meal of my life. I wasn't just eating turkey. I was eating the finality of their hold over me. They were busy planning a cruise while I was quietly planning an exit from their entire reality. I didn't need their seat at the table anymore. I had just bought the whole restaurant. I didn't say goodbye to the house and I certainly didn't wait for the morning light. By 2 a.m., while the rest of the Reed household slept off their expensive wine and Trevor's ego, I had my life packed into the trunk of my beat-up sedan. I left a single note on the kitchen island, weighted down by the $3 lottery ticket's empty silver shavings. It was brief. "I decided to take your advice and make my own luck. I'm traveling to find myself. Don't call, I'll be off the grid for a while." I knew they wouldn't worry. To Marcus and Elaine, my absence would be a convenience. One less budget child to explain away at the country club. As I drove past the manicured lawns of my childhood, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the electric hum of a ghost beginning to haunt her own life. 3 days later, I wasn't at a retreat or on a beach. I was in a glass-walled conference room in Manhattan, sitting across from a team of financial advisors who cost more per hour than my father's car. I placed the orange ticket on the table. The lead advisor, a woman with ice water in her veins and a sharp suit, checked the numbers twice. She looked at me, her professional mask slipping for just a second. "Do you understand what this means, Ms. Reed?" "It means I'm dead," I said calmly. "Riley Reed, the girl who couldn't find her footing, is gone. I want trust. I want a holding company. And I want every cent of this managed through a blind firm. From this moment on, I am a ghost with a 9-figure bank account." I spent the next month living in a modest hotel, watching my family's social media from a burner account. Trevor posted photos from the deck of his cruise, mocking my soul-searching trip in the captions. My mother commented about how some people just aren't built for the pressure of family life. I watched them laugh at the version of me that no longer existed, while my advisors were busy quietly buying up debt portfolios and commercial real estate. I wasn't just finding myself, I was building a fortress. In the auditing of a life, you eventually have to look back at the historical data to understand how the current deficit was formed. My brother Trevor's entitlement wasn't a sudden growth. It was a carefully cultivated asset, watered daily by my parents' blind devotion. To understand why my father felt comfortable handing me a $3 ticket while Trevor got the world, you have to look at the graduation of 2012. I remember standing on the lawn of our high school, my honors cords itching against my neck, looking at the driveway of our home. Parked there was a brand new charcoal gray BMW with a massive red bow on the hood. Trevor hadn't even graduated in the top half of his class, but he was the visionary. My parents stood by the driver's side door, beaming as if he'd just discovered the cure for cancer. "A man needs to arrive in style if he's going to be a leader, Trevor," Marcus had said, tossing him the keys. When I walked up holding my valedictorian plaque, my mother patted my cheek with a distracted smile. "We're so proud of you too, Riley. Your father and I got you a little something to help with your commute to the state college." She handed me a plastic envelope. Inside was a monthly city bus pass and a printed list of tips for entry-level success. "You have such a strong work ethic, honey," Elaine added, her eyes already drifting back to Trevor revving his engine. "You don't need flashy things. You're the reliable one. You'll find a way to make it work. It'll build character." That was the Reed family mantra. Trevor got the capital and I got the character. He got the safety net and I was told to enjoy the view from the tightrope. I spent 4 years of college taking 3 buses to get to my 8 a.m. labs, watching Trevor's Instagram feed as he took weekend trips to Vegas in the car my parents paid the insurance on. Every time I asked for help with a textbook or a repair, I got the same good job lecture. A verbal pat on the head that basically told me my struggle was a virtue they didn't want to interrupt with actual support. They didn't realize that by giving me nothing, they were teaching me how to survive with everything. Building an empire in the shadows requires a certain kind of invisibility, a skill I had perfected over 3 decades of being overlooked at the dinner table. I didn't want the fame that came with a 9-figure windfall. I wanted the leverage. Using a complex web of shelf corporations to obscure the trail, I founded a venture capital firm named Sterling Oak. I chose Sterling, my mother's maiden name, not out of affection, but because it was a name the Reeds had spent years looking down upon as blue-collar and unrefined. It was the perfect cloak. While my parents and Trevor lived their lives out loud, posting every luxury meal and first-class boarding pass to social media, I lived in the quiet, clinical reality of data. I moved into a high-security, minimalist loft in a converted warehouse. A space that looked like a struggling artist's studio from the outside but housed a server array that could track global market shifts in real time. To my family, I was still the unlucky Riley. Every few months, I'd send a generic postcard from a different city, keeping my messages brief and my location vague. I even kept my old, cracked phone, occasionally texting the family group chat to complain about rising rent or car troubles, just to keep their suspicion at zero. In the boardroom of Sterling Oak, however, I was known as the Ice Queen. I didn't invest in visionaries like Trevor. I invested in the reliable ones. The people who worked 3 jobs, the ones with the character my parents so often praised but never supported. By the 3rd year, Sterling Oak had quietly acquired a 40% stake in the very textile suppliers Marcus relied on for his firm. I was becoming the silent landlord of their entire industry. I watched through a digital lens as Trevor's business ventures began to bleed my father dry. I saw the over-leveraged loans, the late payments, and the desperate attempts to maintain their standard of living while the foundation was rotting. They thought I was crying over a cold hot plate in a studio apartment. In reality, I was sitting at a mahogany desk, watching their names move from the asset column to the liability list. I wasn't just finding myself. I was becoming the person who would eventually decide if the Reeds were worth saving. In the world of finance, a collapse rarely happens all at once. It's a series of hairline fractures that finally give way under the weight of arrogance. The Reed Standard was a house built on sand, and by the 4th year of my absence the tide was coming in fast. Marcus had officially handed the reins of the firm's primary acquisitions to Trevor, believing his son's visionary spirit would transcend the need for actual due diligence. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Trevor treated the company treasury like a personal ATM for his lifestyle branding. While he was posting photos from a private villa in Mykonos, funded by high-interest bridge loans, he was ignoring the fact that his main suppliers were quietly being bought out by a mysterious entity they couldn't contact. That entity, of course, was me. I watched the reports roll in. Trevor had missed a major manufacturing deadline because he was scouting locations in the Maldives. He had insulted a legacy client who had been with Marcus for 30 years because the man didn't have enough social media followers. The cruise lifestyle finally hit the iceberg when Marcus was forced to liquidate his retirement fund just to cover the firm's payroll. Elaine stopped posting photos of designer handbags and started sharing inspirational quotes about how true wealth is family, a sure sign that the literal wealth was gone. They were over-leveraged on their mansion, their cars were leased through a company that was about to go under, and Trevor's business ventures had turned into a black hole of litigation. I sat in my office at Sterling Oak, watching a real-time feed of their credit rating plummeting into the red. They had spent decades treating me like a liability and Trevor like an asset. Now the math was finally correcting itself. Marcus called me for the first time in 14 months, his voice sounding thin and old. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask where I had been. He just asked if I still had that little savings account I'd mentioned years ago. I told him I was in a meeting and hung up. The collapse wasn't just financial. It was the total bankruptcy of their pride. The letter arrived not at my office, but at the P.O. box I kept for family emergencies. The kind of emergencies that usually involved Trevor needing a bailout for a bad investment. But this time the envelope was handwritten, the ink smeared as if the person holding the pen had been trembling. It wasn't a birthday card or an apology for a decade of neglect. It was a formal request for a lifeline. Riley, the letter began, stripped of the usual condescension. I hope your travels have been fruitful. Things here have taken a turn we didn't expect. The firm is facing some temporary liquidity issues. Your mother and I are being asked to vacate the house by the end of the month. Trevor is doing his best, but the market has been cruel. I read the words with a clinical detachment. Marcus went on to mention the $3 lottery ticket he'd given me 5 years ago. He actually had the audacity to suggest that if I had won a few $1,000s, or kept any of my little savings from my old job, now was the time to show my loyalty to the Reed name. He wasn't asking for my help because he missed his daughter. He was checking the couch cushions of my life for spare change because he had finally run out of his own. The desperation was palpable. He didn't know that I was the one who had purchased the distressed mortgage on their estate. He didn't know that the liquidity issues were actually a result of Sterling Oak systematically closing the credit loops Trevor had been using to keep them afloat. To Marcus, I was still the girl with the bus pass, perhaps sitting on a modest nest egg that might buy them another month of pretending to be rich. We're family, Riley, he wrote in the closing line. And family doesn't let each other fall. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the shredder. It was a fascinating sentiment from a man who had watched me struggle for years while he handed car keys to a golden child who never worked a day in his life. He wanted the reliable daughter to reappear just in time to be the safety net he never provided for her. I didn't reply to the letter. Instead, I instructed my legal team to move forward with the final acquisition of the Reed assets. If they wanted to talk about family, they could do it in my boardroom. The lobby of the Sterling Oak headquarters was a cathedral of glass and cold, polished stone, the kind of place where voices naturally dropped to a whisper out of respect for the sheer volume of capital moving through the walls. I watched through the one-way glass of the executive boardroom as Marcus and Trevor stepped out of the elevator. They looked like men who had been through a slow-motion car wreck. Marcus's suit was high-end, but it hung off his frame, and Trevor was sweating through his shirt, his usual cocky swagger replaced by a frantic, darting gaze. They had come to beg. They had an appointment with the managing partner, to plead for a last-minute restructuring of the Reed family debt. They thought they were meeting a stranger. They thought they were walking into a boardroom to save their lives. They had no idea they were walking into a reckoning. When my assistant opened the double oak doors, I didn't stand. I kept my chair turned toward the window, looking out over the city skyline that I now owned a significant piece of. Please sit, I said, my voice modulated and professional. I heard the scuffle of chairs as they sat down. Thank you for seeing us, Marcus began, his voice cracking slightly. We've heard Sterling Oak is interested in distressed assets. We have a legacy firm, a family name with decades of history. We just need a bridge loan to get through the quarter. My son Trevor has a visionary plan for. I've seen Trevor's plans, I interrupted, slowly spinning the chair around. They're mostly composed of offshore bar tabs and over-leveraged marketing stunts. The The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the air out of the room. Marcus froze, his mouth half open. Trevor's face went from pale to a sickly mottled red. They stared at me, the daughter they thought was finding herself in a studio apartment, sitting behind a desk that cost more than Trevor's last car. Riley. Marcus whispered, the word sounding like a ghost. Hello, Dad, I said, leaning forward and interlacing my fingers. I got your letter. You mentioned that family doesn't let each other fall. But as I recall, 5 years ago, you handed me a $3 ticket and told me to make my own luck. Well, Marcus, I did. The silence in the room was heavy, a physical weight that seemed to press the air out of my father's lungs. Marcus looked at me, then at the sprawling executive suite, then back at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. Trevor, for the first time in his life, was speechless, his face a ghostly mask of shock. Riley, Marcus finally stammered, his voice thin and desperate. We had no idea. If we had known you were this successful, we would have reached out. We're family. Everything we did to build a future for the Reeds. Now that you've found your way, surely you can see that we're all on the same team. I didn't blink. I didn't feel the surge of anger I expected. I felt the cold, clear peace of a closed ledger. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a single crisp $3 bill, a novelty note I'd kept for this exact moment. I slid it across the mahogany surface until it rested in front of Marcus. You told me 5 years ago that a Reed makes her own luck, I said, my voice as steady as a heart monitor. You handed me a scrap of paper and told me to get out of the way so Trevor could have the world. I took that advice. I worked the late shifts you ignored. I built the character you mocked. And while you were busy spending your capital on cruises and vanity, I was busy buying the ice you were sailing toward. Trevor lunged forward, his voice a frantic whine. Riley, come on. You have $150 million. A tiny fraction of that would save us. You can't just watch your own father go homeless. I'm not watching my father go homeless, Trevor, I replied, standing up and smoothing my jacket. I'm watching a business fail due to poor management. As the CEO of Sterling Oak, I've reviewed your application. Your assets are toxic, your leadership is non-existent, and your risk profile is unacceptable. The loan is denied. I walked toward the door, leaving them staring at the $3 bill. I made my own luck, Marcus. And just like that ticket you gave me, it's not something I'm willing to share with people who didn't believe I was worth the investment. You're excused. I walked out into the crisp evening air of the city, the weight of the Reed name finally falling away. I had made my own luck. And for the first time in my life, my future was perfectly, beautifully debt-free. If you believe that self-respect is the greatest fortune of all, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The audit is over. I'm finally free. Thank you for listening. See you in the next one.